Hi, this is Julian with Behind the Audio. Today I am interviewing Philip Sheppard. He's a cello professor at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and he's also a composer who did so many things. I actually had trouble preparing this interview properly. The most recent thing that you probably heard about is his contribution to the soundtrack of Detroit Become Human, where one composer was in charge of one character each, and he made Kara's music, one of the three main characters. So without further ado, here's Philip Sheppard. Before getting to Detroit Become Human, I saw that you just recently released your, what you call it, sophomore solo orchestral album.
Yeah, it's a very American term, isn't it? It's my second solo orchestral album that's separate from a film project. That's sort of the basis of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and it's called Fall from Earth, but it's essentially, I mean, it's similar to my kind of cinematic music, but it's based on, all the pieces are interconnected, but it's basically string orchestra, solo cello, electric cello, and electronica. So it's the sound world that I write in, but it's all the pieces that seem to fit together away from movies or a game, if you see what I mean.
Interesting. So you were looking for the same style, but with more freedom?
I suppose it's the style that I'm writing in at the moment, and weirdly enough, with the projects that I do, whether it's the game or whether it's movies, people tend to ask me to write in I suppose in my own sound now. Whereas I think when every composer starts off, there's this aspect where you're trying to find, well, what do people want to hear, and actually. You just have to. Yeah, that's a really dangerous path to go down. You actually just have to write what you hope will give one person goosebumps. And if the first person is you, sometimes that works. Not always. Then that's kind of a good place to start. And so I suppose it's music that's written away from brief or commission, but that's probably most representative of where I'm at. So most of the music I write away from projects tends to be for specific people. It tends to be dedicated to friends or people I've worked with, because then I find it much easier to write music about people. I don't want to write music about myself. I mean, that'd be terrible.
That's an interesting approach, actually. And now that we are already on the topic of inspirations, I wrote the paragraphs on your website about sort of your inspirations for this album, and I couldn't quite put together how space travel and an ancient handprint go together. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so it's maybe a slightly abstract thought, but it makes sense to me. My first movie that I ever worked on was called In the Shadow of the Moon, and it was very strange because I went straight from studying and teaching in a conservatoire as a professor at the Royal Academy of Music for a long time, a cello professor, not a composition one, and I made a movie with 5 friends, and none of us had done a film before, and we were working with the Apollo astronauts, so we were working with 7 or 8 of the people who'd walked on the surface of the moon, which is kind of crazy. I thought I couldn't really make the connection between practicing scales in a practice room and then being in a room with people who'd literally been to another world. And I remember thinking, wow, music's kind of got me here. That's crazy. And then since then, I suppose I've been lucky, because of doing a documentary, to be in a circuit of people who do things that I would consider humanly impossible, whether it's flying a spacecraft, whether it's being able to change the world, whether it's being able to start a revolution, whether it's being able to fight a government, all of those kinds of things. To me, all of those require a sense of I suppose, personal elevation. So the album's called Fall from Earth, which means it's almost if you lost belief in gravity. Is that possible? And that's sort of, and at the same time I'm learning to fly, and I just like the idea of kind of almost losing the baggage that one gets and things that weigh people down. There's something to do with actually physically being in the air, and also being able to be mentally free, being able to actually have an imagination that can be really bigger than your own mind. I'm not saying mine is. I'm saying a lot of the people I've been fortunate to know are able to think in terms that seem to be humanly impossible. So the connection with the handprint is that handprint that I talk about was it's on a cave wall in Indonesia, and it's a 14-year-old girl who made the impression of her hand just using like a silhouette. It's like a negative space. And it's always stuck with me because that's 40,000 years old, and it's before there's any technology, and in 40,000 years' time, that will still be there. This computer won't. I won't. My cello won't. My cello will be around in 400 years' time. My laptop certainly won't.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that, in a way, that handprint represents an idea, and that idea is basically, I was here. It's just, this is me. It's a bit of beautiful graffiti, but it's way more permanent than anything that we all do or make. And it seems to me that the things that will travel through time are probably ideas. They're probably things that wrap in goosebumps. Those are the things that will actually have durability. And whether that's a belief system in people are essentially good, I think they are. It might be that, hey, chocolate's nice. It doesn't matter. Whatever that is, that's going to last a lot longer than a lifetime, and a lot longer than a government, and a lot longer even than some religions. All that kind of thing. And so that's sort of the very loose umbrella for all of those ideas, I suppose, is there's a connection with all of them to somebody who maybe, I'd say, surpasses their ability, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm just wondering how it translates into concrete music. How you is that a very emotional sort of connection that you make? You think about these kinds of ideas and you just ride away, or is it more of an intellectual approach?
I don't think it's intellectual. That's a really good question. I think it's more, if I hear something that gives me a thrill, that gives me goosebumps to think about or to hear, then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a similar kind of goosebump rush in harmony and texture and sound. It's not that it's about that thing. It's more, hey, that idea or that picture gave me this lovely visceral feeling. I'd like to try and do that in music. So I suppose it's more like, hey, ultimately, if I can give a listener goosebumps in the same way, but using actually just noise, then and it is noise, it's just noise. I just arrange noise into. I will say that I'm a noise designer. It's easier than saying I'm a composer. And nobody knows what it is, so you can say that, hey, that's what I am. But I think I'm a noise designer, and what I'm good at isn't necessarily writing music, but I might be good at removing sound until what's left sounds nice. Does that make sense? It's a bit like if you've got a block of marble, you can remove a ton of it until you end up hopefully with a statue that looks nice. And that's really what I see my job as being. I think music is already there, and I think it's a case of filtering it out and then framing it and saying, hey, listen to this. I honestly think that's my role. I think.
Interesting. Okay.
That's confusing.
It's I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It made me think of something that I recently read in a Facebook group of composers, but I think it's not exactly what you mean, of somebody writing that they found themselves removing more and more from their pieces to make them better rather than adding stuff.
Yeah.
And I've kind of made the same journey. In the beginning, I thought I had to put everything into a piece, sort of to because I think that's what you do when you're insecure, that you try to hide the melody and all the, you just throw things at people so they can't judge the individual elements. And now that I've done it a couple of years, I like my Cubase projects are like half the tracks.
Oh, that's really good. You're absolutely right. The confidence to actually write less comes over time, and it's really odd because it's really easy writing complicated melodies. It's really simple, but it's really difficult writing a tune with 2 or 3 notes. That restriction, and it's Art Tatum said the same thing. He sort of said the difficult thing is actually playing the rests. And actually, the rests should be the loudest element of your theme when you write a good tune. It should be the rest where the listener kind of actually feels the kind of cadence and the punch of their own bodily syncopation, if that makes sense. It doesn't matter if it's a slow piece of music. And I've come to a similar conclusion as you, that actually if I look at it's funny, I was stemming out, I was separating out an orchestral recording the other day, and it was for a company where in my previous delivery to them, there'd probably been, 16 sets of tracks of stems running on top of each other. You know what I'm talking about. So all those things separated out. And I was mapping it out yesterday, and I realized I couldn't make more than 3 parts out of it. And I thought, oh gosh, that's not very complicated. And actually, my second thought was, actually, maybe that's a good sign. Maybe means I've edited. And I have this theory that it's not mine. I've stolen it from someone else, and I can't remember who it is. But you should draft things, even writing or music, in a really ugly way, and then you should edit beautifully. But what you do is you edit as much as possible. And like you say, you just remove. Do you know what? It's the same with cooking. Because some of the finest meals I've ever have had 3 ingredients in them. It's like, go to America and buy a loaf of bread, and it's got 26 ingredients in it, okay?
I heard it tastes like cake over there.
Oh, it's like cake and plastic, no offense. Unless you eat sourdough from Boudin's, in which case it's about 4 ingredients and it's the world's best bread in the world. But it's a bit like making beer in Germany. That it's against the law to use, to use more than a certain number of ingredients. And there's a reason for that. And then what you end up doing is making sure that the ingredients themselves are better. But it's not so much about the combination of them, it's about the source material actually being beautiful. So I'm much more careful now about how I record a sound than I was previously, because actually it should be able to sound visceral and beautiful on its own, rather than, hey, let's have 26 instruments on this. Actually, let's have 3, but let's record them really close. And I don't mind if I can hear the breathing, because that sounds human. All that kind of stuff. That's on the same lines as what you're talking about, I think.
So what you're saying is not only does the composition of these 3 elements have to be really good, but also the sound quality. Like you have to perfect those 2 aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, the parallel with food, it's lunchtime. The parallel with food is that if I'm using olive oil in something, I'm going to be really fussy about where it's going and how it's picked and the amount of sunshine. It's the same with actually the cello that I play. The wood that it's made from was already 300 years old before the instrument was put together 300 years ago, and that's going to have a quality that I can never get better with a modern instrument, just because there's something magical about that, and there's something in the long preparation of it that means when it then comes to be recorded, it will then sound like it's just got another layer to it, that it's really hard to define what it is, but a listener will know that they will sense it, and they don't need to know anything about music, they don't need to know anything about instruments, but they will know. That's these days now I've grown up a bit, now I've been doing this for a while, that's really what I look for in every project, I think.
Well, speaking of projects and nice sounding instruments, I'll just get back to your point just for our listeners. I'll do a quick overview over your latest big project, which is Detroit Become Human. That was developed by Quantic Dream. Detroit Become Human came out just a month ago, May 25th, 2018. And you made one soundtrack that is just for one character, which is Kara, one of the 3 main characters. And to get back to the aspect of recording and instruments, you had the whole thing recorded by the English National Orchestra at Studio One at Abbey Road. But I listened to the soundtrack twice now. I have 3 questions. Essentially, was it just real instruments, no VSTs? Do we hear you playing somewhere in there? And I did hear some synthesizers. I wanted to know how you put those 2 elements together, and which synthesizers you used.
Oh, good question. Let's address all of that. So the most of the recording was done in Abbey Road Studio One, but when I was writing, I don't write at a keyboard because I can't play the piano. I've got lots of pianos, but I can't play them, which is very interesting. But I've got lots of cellos, which I can play. So I when I'm sketching, I tend to loop cello just to kind of build all the parts up.
Oh yeah, I saw that performance of yours on YouTube. Awesome, yeah, that was really cool. Do you play a lot with that loop station?
Yeah, I do. Most of the concerts I do a lot of concerts in America, just live looping and improvising. It's fun, you know. It's
awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of stupid, but it kind of works.
No, it's great. It's awesome. I've never seen that.
But it's a good way of composing because you end up writing a kind of linear way. You're not writing in blocks. You're not writing kind of in chords. If I tried to play the piano, it'd be horrible. But I'd be writing in chords. Whereas when I'm writing on a single line instrument, I'm actually creating weaving lines that fit together, if that makes sense. So it tends to mean that I write better melodies if I'm writing them for voice or on a string instrument. So, but to your specific point, so most of the recording, was done in Studio One at Abbey Road. But all of the demos that I recorded were solo cello and were done here, actually in my studio outside London. It's not a big room. It's about 5 meters by 5 meters, but it's actually also a library. So it's got the sound is absorbed by
the books.
That I collect, which means you get no standing waves, to be very technical about it. And I've recorded very close. So my mics are right in the bridge of the instrument, and I record in the middle of the night. So it kind of, and I normally try and record, this is going to sound crazy. I've never told anyone this, but I try and record when I'm very tired. Now, the reason for that is that it means that the playing becomes a little more fragile. It's not as confident on purpose. And also, I'm less likely, I think, to be thinking too much when I'm improvising, if that makes sense. So you get into a kind of flow state where you can end up coming up with something that you wouldn't necessarily do in a proper recording studio, in a professional recording studio. So most of my film projects, and especially for this game, end up being a blend between this room, my instruments here, and the live orchestra as well. But what you're asking about as far as synths go, I've built a lot of virtual instruments that are, they sound like they are synths, but they are things like an electric cello that's not triggering synths. It's sampled. Yeah, well, no, it's actually just the strings. I've had an instrument made which is kind of beautiful. And it sounds a bit like a viol, so a bit like a Renaissance instrument. But then what I do is I put it through things like guitar rig. I run it through like line 6 foot pedals, and I also run it through kind of modular synths as well. So it's doing all sorts of weird stuff. So generally, when you can hear something that sounds like it's a screwed up guitar, it's probably a cello. Yeah, and when you can hear something that sounds like it's an analog synth, it's a cello as well. Cool. But the actual software I use Iris, which I love, by Isotope. I think that's one of the most incredible sampling programs. The great thing about that is you can get into it and you can change the harmonics, the overtones above the instrument. So I've built lots of patches in there. And one other secret, which is that I've got a Steinway grand piano here in the other studio, and I recorded a long time ago. I recorded just a sequence of notes in there that when you drop them down in pitch, and I put them in Ableton actually, which I use a lot. I use Ableton push controllers a huge amount. I love them as instruments. But any bass line I've ever written in the last 5 years in an orchestra, the double bass 2 octaves underneath it, so it's inaudible, is a grand piano tracking the same line. So that's and what it does is it means you get a deep sub that you can't really hear, but you can feel it. And it's really strange. It gives a super root. It's a good for any composer. I always try and track 2 octaves below your bass note, and it honestly works because it opens up the dimensionality of any track without increasing the volume. And it does seem to work. I kind of stumbled on it by accident because, I remember the first time I ever went to see an IMAX film, and you're punched in the chest with this bass sound, but it's not loud. It's a feeling. I thought I need to work out how to do that. And I'm like, the next time I see one of my movies in a big screen, I want it to feel like that. And having that piano 2 octaves below did it every time.
Oh, cool. I didn't ever think of using a piano. I have thickened tracks before with just a simple sine wave, which is...
It's very like that.
Okay.
It actually, it has, because there's no attack on the notes.
Yeah.
I mean, but by the time it's got 2 octaves down, it just sounds like a kind of warm hum. So it's it's essentially a sine wave, but it's a dirty sine wave.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not quite pure, so therefore it sounds better.
Yeah, absolutely. It has more and more character.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, apart from that, are there just strings and distorted strings in the whole soundtrack?
Yeah. That's it. I'm trying to think now. Yeah, because I mean, as I say, I've built a lot of instruments sort of from scratch, and they do appear to be synths, but they're nearly always based originally on an analog waveform, and generally they're either from a piano or from a cello at some point.
Cool.
Yeah, it's weird, and whenever a track sounds too clean, I tend to throw strange things in it. So I've got these harmonics that I tend to overlay inside a track. I even recorded at one point an hour of silence in Abbey Road Studio 2, which I occasionally put under everything, which is kind of which is weird, I call it an hour without the Beatles. It's kind of
awesome.
Yeah, right. I actually did it by taking all the silence from an orchestral session. So there's people sitting there, and you can sense there are people breathing, but they're not playing anything. So there's this kind of tension to it, and it's.
Okay. I was wondering if they just left you alone for an hour in the studio, but okay.
Oh, yeah, they do that as well, but it doesn't sound as good as a lot of people sounding slightly nervous, and breathing.
Awesome. Could release that by itself one day.
I think so. Very minimalist. I feel I've given you lots of secrets.
Yeah, they're all out there now.
Damn.
Onto the aspect that it's a game, and it's actually a soundtrack for a character in a game. I think those are two very defining features as well of the soundtrack. Actually, to my later point first, you said that you write music about people when you write music in general. That's something you do naturally. So was it the same with this fictitious Kara that you wrote music for?
Yeah, I had to make her real in my head. And it's funny because most of my movies have been about real people because they've been documentaries. And it's quite easy writing about real people because you don't have to create a sense of artifice. It's you can read everything about them, often meet them, take their voice and make that a thing. Obviously, this is literally an entirely synthetic character in every single way.
Yeah.
So weirdly enough, I didn't work very much from the computer-generated images. I worked a lot on. I had nearly all of the motion capture film of Valerie Curry, the actress. It was amazing. So I actually wrote it really about her. I've not told her that. She probably feel quite uncomfortable about it, but because until the thing was kind of rendered fully, it was impossible to get that level of expression that you see in the final game. And it's a bit like being a poker player. You're looking for those little signs and tells that you get from a totally human interaction. Now, having said that, I had to find a way whereby I thought I was going to write mechanical music. I thought I was going to write something that was going to be based around clockwork and toys. And, I did that when I started. I was using kind of a broken speak and spell machine from, that kind of stuff and weird circuitry, bits of aeroplanes, things that had a mechanical kind of life to them. But then, without being a spoiler at all, because it happens at the beginning of the game, Kara is suddenly put in the position where she suddenly has to be more like a mother than a robot.
Yeah.
So, and I've got kids, and I've got 3 daughters, and actually I found myself pretty quickly thinking about what's it feel like to protect somebody? What does it feel like to actually have that fear that any parent does? And a kind of father's fear is quite strange. It's sort of, I want to protect and I want to make you free at the same time. And I really just tapped into that. And then I found that was a really good place to write from. And then with any project, I wrote about 5 pieces to start with, just for people to kind of react to and say yes or no. And then once we found the thing that sounded like or felt like her, I wrote tons and tons and tons of music. I mean, so much. And I had a year to write this, which really, in my world, that's a really long time. The most amount of time I ever have on a movie is normally 2 to 3 months from having the first idea to delivering everything fully recorded and mixed. Sometimes it's as little as 12 days from commission to delivery. That's going into a studio with an orchestra in the middle, having, and you have to come up with 80 minutes of music. So it was very strange having that much time. And what it meant was that I ended up coming up with whole ideas and then throwing the whole thing away. So I think that's terrible. Let's try this. Let's do this, this, and this. And you kind of go in circles until you edit away all of the noise and you just come up with something that feels like it's purely the soul of that character.
So that sounds like having that extra time was really beneficial to the end product, right?
Yeah, it's the first time in 11 years of being a full-on composer that I've ever had that much time. And it's quite scary having that much freedom. Actually, it's easy when someone says I need it tomorrow. Where if they say I need it in 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, that's really hard.
Okay.
It is. Deadlines are. I live in the world of deadlines. Deadlines are very relaxing for me. It's I've never missed one. It gives you the adrenaline to come up with a good idea quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very easy to have a bad idea when you're given a lot of time. And so I had loads of bad ideas.
That's why I asked if you felt like it made the end product better or worse, because I've talked to more people about this kind of thing. I know a lot of people who freelance, work from home, composers, but also academics who write their thesis for like 3 years. And sometimes I wonder if having like that time cut by 80% would have yielded a better result.
I think that's often true because it's either one or the other. So for me, quick ideas are really good. Middle ideas are terrible. And then long form ideas tend to be quick ideas that have actually been, we call it flamethrown. They've had everything kind of carved off them and they become solid. They become, you're so sure about them that actually they've been through every form of weather, and they will still survive. When you're in the middle of that, it's the kind of interim amount of time is actually the worst, because then everyone has an opinion, everyone changes their mind, and actually part of it isn't so much the composer, it's more the people listening the other end will listen a different way if they know that it has to be finished by tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? They will make a binary decision, and it's better for me if a director says that sucks rather than, that's 60% there. 60% there means start again.
Yeah.
You can't recover it. That's like someone saying 50% alive. No, they're half dead.
Yeah. But that's also something people have to learn. At the beginning, when you start out as a composer, oftentimes feedback is sometimes like maybe people are too polite, or and then you get back to the track and you change some things. And at the very beginning when I started out, it was like, did you change anything about the track? And I was like, yeah, I changed loads of things, because to your ears, you heard it tons of times, it sounds different. But what they actually want is or what would actually have been best would have been starting from scratch immediately, because they want a different track.
So the solution to that, which I learned over time, is don't spend too long writing initial ideas. Actually, just write hundreds of ideas. Draft many ideas and then throw a lot of them away very happily. And that's why if you play an instrument, it's actually and I don't think of it as improvisation, because that's kind of a word which has too many meanings. But if you think of it as being like spontaneous composition, now everything that you make up isn't going to be great. Maybe one thing, two things out of 100. Yeah, one thing in 50 might have legs. It might be, might have potential. So the trick is to maybe sit and play for an hour, and record it all. And you know what? 1 minute of it might be really good. That's plenty. That's great.
That's a great method.
But it works. It honestly works. It's a bit like Ernest Hemingway didn't worry about having an idea. He would just write, 5,000 words before his first whiskey in the morning. He would just, don't do that. But he would do that. It's just sit and write. And that honestly works. And I see too many composers, particularly young composers, sitting there, with a pencil or at a computer thinking, I don't know what to write. Doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work. It's much better. Go for a walk, take an instrument with you, whatever, and just write, and then throw away, and you'll end up with something beautiful. If you do that every day for a month, you'll have a symphony.
Yeah,
it's enough material. And then, but so the skill, if there is one, is being able to spot what's good and what sucks.
Yeah.
And you have to trust your sense of goosebumps. And it might simply be that melody stretching up a seventh or dropping down a ninth makes me feel good. I don't know why. I kind of like that. It might be, I've heard something that sounds like a hook. Actually, the sound of that bowl dropping in the sink sounds really cool. That's compositional. That's fine. Or it might be that going from that chord, I often drop chords by a third. It's a terrible habit. I love it. That in doing that, there's one particular one that feels like, that I know that's going to come up somewhere. It's going to be the center of a piece. I'll then reverse engineer other chords to fit around it. And that's enough. I try, one or two of those a day, you've got a career.
Awesome. So you would say that one of the most important skills to develop as a composer is actually taste, right? Actually hearing what's good.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that's really important, and it comes off something you said, the other thing to develop is a sense of separation from your work and yourself, by which I mean, when you're writing, you have to pour your soul, brain, and heart into it. But when you've finished your piece of music, that piece of music exists without you. It's not about you. It's not for you. It's for someone else, and it's about something else, I think, which means if someone says, I think that music sucks, and they will, and they might be a director or they might be a listener, you can turn around to that person and say, yeah, I can hear why you'd think that. And you don't feel bad.
Yeah.
Similarly, when someone says, do you know that piece of music changed my life? You can say, thank you. Doesn't make me a better person. That piece of music isn't me, and it's not about me. So you have to be a bit zen about it and actually kind of think, well, once the music's out there, it's not virtuous and it's not bad. It's neither one thing nor the other. But when you were writing it, you were pouring yourself into it. But once it's left your desk and it's gone into the studio, you do not own it, and you also, in a way, don't own its baggage. Now that sounds like a deep psychology. It is a way of coping with criticism.
Sure. But it's also true. It's not like you're lying to yourself. It's just true what you said, because you're writing it for a particular project, for a particular character, none of which you came up with, and ultimately it's the other people that have to like it.
Yes, and also people get very upset. Well, they get very excited and very upset about music, particularly in games, which I understand. I mean, I'm not a gamer, so it's not really my world, but it's a very passionate world.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I mean, I won't go into it too much, but I'm a composer who's probably received more death threats than any other composer.
How's that?
Because I had to rearrange all of the anthems for the Olympic Games in 2012, which then become the anthems for the next 25 years that are used for all the Olympic events. Now, people feel very, very strongly about anthems, and I understand that, and that's fine. So someone can write to me and say, I hate what you did with the American national anthem. It sucks, and you're a horrible person, and I'm going to kill your family. That kind of thing. I mean, dramatic, but there are people out there who'll do that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's quite funny when you say, well, I'm enough of a geek to be able to work out what your IP address is and where you live. So I'll write to them and say, well, thank you for your criticism. You have to understand that was a commission, and I agree with the points you're making about the harmony. You might be right, but this is a commission, and your head of state approved it, by the way. And would you possibly like to retract the death threat? Because I'm not sure that's connected to our exciting discussion about my work. I don't see the connection. And it's hilarious, actually, when you say, well, thank you for your comments. And I normally retweet them. I normally kind of put them out and say, here's an interesting comment. It's just, but you have to learn a sense of scope and sanity, and in a way, it comes from that. And it's been great because once you bring it into movie, and I really care very much about movies and games and things like that. I really do care about the music, but it's not about me. Mm-hmm. I'm writing about the character, and I'm definitely writing for the player or the viewer. That's really where my responsibility is. And it's kind of goes with this thing. I've worked with lots of rock musicians, and I think the idea of being famous because of your music is kind of terrifying. Mm-hmm. and a bit unhealthy. I'd be quite happy if nobody ever knew what I looked like. That's totally fine because it means nothing. My music has no connection to it at all. Mm-hmm. And the good thing about being a composer is you can be really anonymous.
Yeah, that's actually something that appeals to me as well, because you can work on really cool stuff, and you can really make it without people annoying you when you leave your house.
Yes. Yeah, and I was in a band for a while that did quite. I've been in professional string quartets, and I've been in rock bands that have done quite well. And they've sort of said, "Yeah, we need to talk about your haircut." And you think, no, not really, because I've got to pick my children up from kindergarten, so I'm honestly not gonna. You're not gonna dress me. No, this is not happening.
That's really cool. But you made me really curious. Did people ever respond to your response letters?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. They got very worried because they could obviously see that I was dealing with it, and I had an apology. Every single one of them, I've had a personal apology from them.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Which I haven't been looking for. I've kind of thought sometimes the best thing to do is to engage with people and either be humorous or confuse them by saying, "Yeah, I think you're right." It's like how to descale a fight.
That's super disarming. Yeah.
Well, if someone ever tries to fight you, what you do is, or they're trying to offend you to build up to fight, if you constantly agree with them, they can't do anything. There's nowhere to go, and that's kind of fun, So that's the way I deal with it. I was expecting plenty of hate for doing a game. I don't know why it hasn't been fun.
You can expect that.
No, but
it's unfortunately kind of in the culture of video games.
It can be, and I was sort of ready for it, but actually it's been very gracious so far. But you have to just be sort of approach it hopefully without taking it to heart, I suppose.
But I felt like, at least from reading the comments under the videos on YouTube and all, that people really love your soundtrack. Did you get negative feedback from the gaming community?
No.
I'm
kind of like, why not? I must have done something wrong. I don't know. No, they've been really nice, and it's opened up a whole layer of people I would never normally be playing to, and actually I've learnt a lot from one of the actors in the game, Brian Deschard. He does this great thing where if anybody messages him on Twitter, and he's got thousands and thousands of followers, he'll engage with as many of them as possible, and it's really gracious. And actually, if someone writes and says, "I like what you do," I always write back to them because someone's taken the trouble to kind of sit and write that. These days, you can respond to people, and I think you should.
It's awesome.
I think that's only right, And also, if there have been a couple where someone's been trying to be dramatic and saying, someone said I want to fight Philip Sheppard the other day, and they were actually making the point that because it was making them feel too much Sheppard, because I thought it looked really good. I was like, yeah, bring it on. Let's do this. And I think I wrote, can't we have a cup of tea first?
Yeah.
He went along with it. So it was kind of, you have to be playful in this stuff. Life's too short to be too serious about it,
Absolutely,
really.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get back to the music. You said you're not a gamer. Usually, Quantic Dream games are notoriously film-like.
Yeah.
So, but you said you work with off all of this mocap footage. So you didn't actually make much. This is also something I noticed when I watched the 2.5-hour playthrough of Kara's storyline. And I noticed that the music isn't that interactive. It tends to just play sort of in the background and more support the mood than the action. Right?
Yes, it's not. It's so the way that the mechanics of the game work, certainly for Kara's character, I can't talk to the others necessarily as much, is that there are very few moments where the music is overly, I suppose, dynamic in a technical sense, in as much as it's not necessarily okay. You hit that and this is triggered. Yeah. There were some moments where we knew we could do that, particularly in, for instance, the fight scene with Todd. That's kind of because it's a funny mixture of cutscene and these kind of interactive controls. So some of it's hidden, the mechanics of how the game is triggering the music. And there's things like when there's a music box that's opened, there's all sorts of clever stuff there whereby some of the music is coming from one place, some of it's in your head, some of it's actually in location as you're moving around, but it does fit together. So it was locked in, but it was probably in a much more ambient and technically diegetic way, so that things tended to appear to come from specific objects or places. But it wasn't so much that, okay, if I hit this person and then that cue's going to start.
Okay.
Having said that, we built an enormous toolkit of parts so that when the characters start knitting their narratives together, the separate themes overlay between myself and the other composers. That's not down to any brains on my part. That's entirely down to the music editors at Quantic Dream, who are just incredible. I mean, really brilliant.
But you did have to coordinate with, like on a musical level, with the other two composers. If you're going to overlay your music, no?
No. Here's the crazy thing. We thought, all three of us, so it's Niam Fakari and John Paisano and myself, we had every intention of sitting in a studio and jamming together and writing. And once we started writing out individual sketches for our own characters, Quantic Dream realized pretty quickly that there was more strength in us developing a very particular sound and a kind of palette, a sound world for each character separately, kind of keeping them in their own silo. Mine was sort of soulful and string-based. Nima's was kind of found sounds and beautiful analog synths, still with raw, close recorded sound. And then John's was much more sort of epic, full orchestra kind of hybrid score. And because which matched our characters' kind of motivations, and because our characters are in their own story, really, especially at the beginning, it made sense for us not to actually be influenced by one another at all. And then the crazy thing is that, for instance, when Kara's crossing the freeway, we just tried overlaying, I think, one of my bits of music with some of Nima's, and they just fitted together. And it was
what? Okay.
It was completely accidental and like serendipity. And it's weird sometimes when you actually fully isolate things, your ear will make them fit together, even though they've not been written towards one another at all. It was really quite strange, and I'm so happy with how it came out in that way, because I love the other composers' music. I think it's great, and I'm actually glad that I didn't hear it, because I think it would have affected the color of what I was writing.
I absolutely understand keeping it separate to like preserve the identities of the music and the characters as best as possible. But I did think that it's, for instance, for scenes like the one on the freeway where Kara is chased by Connor, you would have like collaborated to make a scene where two main characters occur, but you didn't.
Thought so. We didn't. The music seemed to have its own life where it naturally locked in together. Which is great. I mean, I love that. I think also if you're writing aware of another composer's stuff, you start to write more for the other composer than you do necessarily for the project, which is a weird thing to say, but you're trying to impress each other. Does that make sense? You're trying to write, right, I'm going to write for him rather than actually for the player. Yeah. So I think for all of us, we probably ended up sounding more like ourselves than we have done before. Bear in mind, this is the first project I've done where I could purely concentrate on one character, not different characters and and a setting and a landscape and all that. I literally just have to write the inside of her head. That was my job.
Mm-hmm.
And that never, it's almost more operatic. It's more like kind of, okay, I'm going to track this one character the entire way through a story arc. That never happens in a movie. Not that I can think of, you know.
No.
Because you're always having to write for the scenery as well, or
Yeah.
an interaction with another character. I was almost encouraged to not do that. So I wasn't really writing music for Todd, for instance. I was writing music. It was all still in her head, what I was writing. That makes sense, you know.
Absolutely.
So,
and so there was no additional music for any, there was just your 3 character scores. So
that's it. That is it. That's all. Yeah. I mean, it ended up being about 55 separate pieces of music that then got split out into big toolkits and stuff. So it was a lot, and it was a lot of recording. But I probably wrote 10 times as much of that in the actual process. You know?
Sure, I mean, yeah, but that's really, the one playthrough I saw was 2.5 hours long, and that's just one of many possible variations of Carol's story alone.
Yes.
So you have to like write loads of music for such an enormous story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I haven't played it since it came out, actually. I'm going to, but I want to have some separation from it, so I don't sit there thinking, "Oh, I wish I'd written that instead." You know what I mean? I want to actually play it unconsciously. And my 10-year-old has played it, which is hilarious because it's an R-rated game. But he was playing it with me when I was writing it, so that we could test scenes. Because my hands naturally go to the PS1 setting, and the last time I played computer games was Wipeout on the PS1, and I was really good.
Okay.
But it didn't have paddles. It was it was just buttons. So my default setting is wrong. So my 10-year-old's like, "Dad, let me help you with work."
That's really cool.
It looks cool. I took him to Quantic Dream Studios to the mocap studio, and they made him a game tester for the day, and he's decided that's going to be his job.
Okay. Let's see. I can recommend game developer. Game tester tends to be really repetitive, and you have to
try and explain that to him. But David Cage, who runs Quantic, said that the last time a musician brought their son to the studio, it was David Bowie bringing Duncan Jones. I'm like,
what?
And he said that Duncan had turned around to his dad and said, "Dad, I think I want to be a director." Which is what my son had said as well. So he said, "Watch out, it might happen." I went, "Yeah, it's fine. I'm not David Bowie. It's all right."
But that's quite the legacy. Yeah. Oh man, that's cool. Yeah, I don't really care if, I don't know. I played R-rated games when I was 10, and I'm not really scarred, so I think that's all right.
It's fine. Yeah.
But there is some heavy subject matter there. In the game, so I felt like the first half was about slavery, and the second half had like Holocaust themes. So that was really tough, the whole story. And I was wondering, like, did you draw inspiration from, because you said you really wrote for the character, but did you draw inspiration from any other like musical works that dealt with similar subject matter?
Honestly, no, but I drew a lot on the subjects that were referred to, if that makes sense. I'm really, this is going to sound crazy, I'm really careful not to listen to a lot of music. Mm-hmm. Because I'm always terrified that I'm going to copy it in some way.
Oh, yeah.
And so I tend to read a lot for inspiration rather than listen to a lot. So, yeah, I mean, obviously there were implied themes to do with racial prejudice, certainly to do with the Holocaust was definitely a touch point.
Yeah.
I've been to Auschwitz, and I've been to those places. I didn't want to lean on that too hard, but certainly reading things like Primo Levi, if this that was very important. And I'd read a lot of Solzhenitsyn when I was younger as well. More to do with the science of sentience in machines.
Okay.
I was, weirdly enough, I was very good friends with Marvin Minsky, who was the guy who invented the concept of artificial intelligence in the first place. He died about a year and a half ago. It was about 88, 89, and he was a good friend of mine, weirdly enough. He in fact invented the computer HAL in 2001: Space Odyssey.
Oh.
but he also taught Arthur C. Clarke and Richard Feynman and people like that. And it was weird because I knew him as a friend. So we did have a lot of conversations about this. And his widow, Gloria, who's just hilarious, is really wanting to play the game. But we actually snuck Marvin Minsky in as an Easter egg. So, yeah.
Where?
I had been given a piece of piano music by him, by his daughter. She had given me his because he was a great pianist and composer. And no one's really ever heard this stuff. So I took the tape into Abbey Road, cleaned it up, and I recorded a kind of concerto accompaniment around him playing the piano. And then I showed it to David Cage. He said, "Wait a minute, I've actually named a character after Marvin Minsky. Did you knew him?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. Here's a piece of music that I recorded. It was all planned. As in, hey, how cool would it be if this appeared in the game somewhere? I'm not going to tell you where it appears, but
what's this?
yeah, but you get to about 2,000 points, and you can unlock Marvin Minsky rather than the gun, which I kind of quite like, because then it might mean some 14 or 15-year-old is sitting there thinking, wait, who's Marvin Minsky? And then they might go and read about him. And for me, that encapsulates what my job is as a musician, is to kind of say, hey, this person's really cool. This is lovely. Let me bury this in something that's kind of a commercial project. And that might live on a little bit. That idea might live on a little bit longer. So it also showed, I think, that the company, the Quantic and David, are quite romantic, and also they're quite artistic as well. It wasn't just about dime on the dollar. It was very much about, hey, we can make some really nice gestures here, you know. So that was a kind of fun one. I'm really, of all the things about this game, that's the thing I'm proudest of, actually, is being able to sneak my friend in there.
It's really cool. No, but you can tell from the end product that it was really about something. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed in the background, but I'm a pretty big fan of Ghost in the Shell.
Oh wow! Great.
And I have the poster here. It's the only poster I have, really.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's not a dissimilar kind of look and feel to that, is it? You know.
Yeah, it's all the subject matter. I mean, it's essentially the whole Pinocchio story all over again, right? Being a real boy without being actually alive.
Well, and you can track it all the way back to Greek mythology as well, because there's the story of Olympia, and you've got Prometheus stealing fire, and it's a very old. Even the golem, if you think about it, in kind of Jewish cultures. But yeah, it's a very old European idea, this, and there is all of that to tap into as well. I mean, it's funny, I did listen to things like Richard Strauss' Olympia, or Olympia's aria, things like that, because he's got this great way of writing music that feels like clockwork, that's actually still very soulful. It's really beautiful, you know, and it's that's definitely a trope, and it's definitely an idea that's lasted a long time in Western culture. So, if part of it taps into that, then that would be cool, you know. Yes,
yeah, and it's becoming ever more relevant now with technological advances and all.
Totally.
Yeah, I think I've already talked for an hour. So, is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't touch on before?
No, I don't think so. What I would say is, if any of your listeners would like to hear other types of music, then they can message me on Twitter, and I'll send them for a free album. How about that?
Oh wow, that's really nice of you.
No, well, why not? I want people to hear I don't want to sell music. I want people to hear music. So, if they're interested in hearing more, just get in touch, and I always send people download codes. So that's a genuine offer. So if anyone's interested in that, then that's the least I can do for taking up an hour of their time, I think.
Come on. Oh no, that's really nice of you. Thank you very much. I'll pass it along then.
No problem. Great. Well.
Okay, cool. Then thanks a lot for your time and for the insights, all the secrets you just gave away forever.
Well, Julian, thank you so much. You're a great interviewer, and I really love the show. So it's a real honor for me to be on it, and I'm excited to see what people think of the game and the music. And yeah, thank you.
Wow, what a guy! He not only did some interesting projects, but also knew some fascinating people like Marvin Minsky. So I hope we didn't drift off too far from our usual topics like musical composition. Anyway, you heard the man. He's giving away codes for free for his music, so just hit him up on Twitter. His handle is @Philip Sheppard, Philip with one P in the end, and Sheppard with P-P-A-R-D. And he will get back to you, even if you threaten physical harm, apparently. So, do go and use this exclusive offer he made us to enjoy more of his music. And of course, subscribe to us for more interviews like this one, where we really go behind the audio. So if you enjoyed it, follow us, check out our website and our social pages, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!